welcome to the Big Fat Gay Podcast, where we talk about the things that are weighing on our minds. I'm Dan Oliverio. I'm an author, chubby chaser, and this is Fat Liberation Month, not just on the Big Fat Gay Podcast, but all around the world. So we're going to be talking about that and a whole lot of other things. Meanwhile, it is a sunny and lovely day here in West Hollywood, California, and I just feel like just chirpy today. That's how I feel. I feel chirpy.
That is the chirpy one.
I'm the chirpy guy.
I'm Trevor Keyzone. I'm a super chub. Happy Fat Liberation Month, Charlie Brown. I am also in, sunny West Hollywood, although I have my blinds drawn. I'm chirpy. I'm not chirpy. I'm burbly, maybe.
Ah, yes.
To my left is not Michael. He is unfortunately not with us today. He had a work catastrophe.
Poor baby.
And this is our last episode before a hiatus for more work stuff for Michael. His form of vacation is working even harder on other stuff. But even though we're not going on hiatus, we're going to have some mini-sodes for you. So you get to look forward to that during Fat Liberation Month. So take it down.
He swears he wanted to be here. He swears. He sends his love to all of you. But he could not make it today in body. Hi, my name is Don Marshall. I'm a big chubby guy living in sunny Hollywood. And today I am, you know what? It is Fat Liberation Month and I'm feeling very liberated. Because I'm fully vaxxed now and I'm finally able to go back out in the real world.
Yay!
I went to a theme park yesterday. And
did not.
I had a boysenberry food festival at Knott's Berry Farm.
I'm jealous. That sounds lovely.
The rides are all closed, and it was apparently the lightest crowd of the summer, which I was fine with. But
you got boysenberry. My quest is to find a live actual berry of boysen.
I had a bunch of them yesterday. You should have told me. I'd have put one in a little jar and brought it for you.
I've been in search of an actual boysenberry for years.
Yes.
Well, I got to say, if any of you do make it to the Knott's Berry Farm Boysenberry Festival, seek out the boysenberry Mai Tai.
Oh my!
That was hands down the treat of the day for me. Some other very tasty stuff out there, but the Mai Tai was the winner.
For those of you who don't know, the boysenberry was invented at Knott's Berry Farm by Mr. Boysen, a partner of Mr. Knott's.
Yes, it's a big conspiracy from Big Berry.
That's right. The money of Big Berry.
Welcome back to the Big Fat Gay Podcast. Light.
Yeah.
We're 75% of what you're used to.
We're a 3 cheese pizza today instead of a 4 cheese pizza.
It is true. But being Fat Liberation Month, I thought this came up in pop culture, and I thought it was really significant because so often when we think of fat liberation, it tends to be a lot of things you see in body positivity about women and by and for women. And the BBC had this wonderful was it an article, Trevor, or a documentary?
An article
on basically how body image affects men's mental health in a new study. And I thought this was outstanding. Did you want to tell us a little bit about it, Trevor?
Yeah. I think it's especially big because, we love to bash on the UK and the crazy anti-fat stuff going on there. But I thought this was lovely. So it was a research study by an organization called CALM, Campaign Against Living Miserably, which I love that name.
I do too.
Very British, very perfect. And it was Calm with Instagram, and they found that 48% of men aged 16 to 40 had struggled because of how they feel about their body. Of 2,000 males asked, 58% said the pandemic affected how they feel about their body in a negative way. Only 26% said they were happy with how they look. And 21% said they don't feel comfortable talking to anyone about it.
Yeah, and that to me was significant because I sometimes wonder why is so much fat activism. It's very much focused by and for women, which is appropriate because it is definitely a feminist issue. On the other hand, sometimes it can feel like, well, where are the men? Where are all the men? I know there are fat men somewhere, right? I've dated them. So, and I thought this is really key that, a fifth don't even feel comfortable talking about their feelings around their body.
Mm-hmm. One, because of that, Calm is launching these things called body talks where they are bringing in different body image campaigners such as Jamie Lang, Stevie Blaine, Leon McKenzie, and Russell Kane. Jamie Lang says, you scroll through hashtags like body positivity, and hashtag self-love on Instagram. And you see so many women sharing their experience of body changes during lockdown and advice for self-care and motivational messages to support their community. It's hard to ignore the fact that there's a stark gender divide here, and men are often missing from that conversation.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And it comes down to, ultimately the individual. But I think this is going to be a theme in our episode today of like, how do people want to participate? How do men want to participate in activism? Or do they even think of it as activism? For some people, activism is just taking your shirt off at the pool because it's a huge triumph.
I mean, yeah, I can understand how it got tied up into just pure feminism and people thinking of it as being a female issue. But hopefully we can dip a little bit more into how this rolls down on all of us today.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I see we've got something in Fat Watch today.
Yes, it's Fat Watch. It's 2021. Roll the music, Michael.
Yay!
He's far away hitting the play button, and we're here. We're in. So I saw this in the Long Beach Post, which is, support local news. Lovely. And it was an article about Fat Girl Has Moxie, who is a fat black queer roller skater. It's an interview with her, but also talking about how she was featured in a mini documentary by Nike. The documentary was about different female skaters, kind of exploring diversity within skating and specifically different types of female skaters. And she ended up kind of getting attacked as part of, like, after the campaign launched, there was all this vitriol aimed towards her.
You mean like trolling online?
Yeah. On the like Nike page.
Yeah. And while Nike was sort of a bit unresponsive about that. I mean, they did take some steps, but the filmmaker was much more solicitous in trying to in talking with her, and because it's you feel like you're taking ground, and the trolls make it quite palpable that like, no, you haven't. We're going to make sure you stay in your place, and it's really unfortunate. And I think women do experience that a lot more than men do in many cases.
Yeah. I know even just for a mainstream woman to be involved with skate culture can take a little bit of elbow throwing to make some space for yourself.
Yeah. But she went on to talk about how, initially she was just in this really dark space about it and just felt so beat down, but turned the pain into art and made a video and kind of spoke directly to the trolls. And she said, "Dear Nike trolls, thank you for reminding me why the world needs people like me. Why I do what I do. I cry and I rise. You may try to destroy me, and still I rise. I'm proud that my friends and I have a mini doc on Nike Journal." She goes on to thank her friends. And I think also she talks about kind of how, going through this journey, turning the pain into art, and then also achieving liberation through changing her style, going from baggy shirts to neon crop tops and shiny pleather short shorts instead of jeans, and just really appreciating how fully embracing her body and changing her fashion to not cover her body, but really just kind of showcase everything.
Yeah, celebrate the body.
Yes. But yeah, it was lovely, and I thought it was appropriate given it's Fat Liberation Month and what we're going to be talking about in our main topic.
Speaking of which, I think we have someone waiting for us in the guest room.
Yes.
So folks, please enjoy our conversation with Tigress Osborn. As a reminder, we will be gone for the month of May, but we will be back in early June. And as Trevor mentioned, we have a couple special episodes lined up for you to enjoy while we're away.
So as we mentioned earlier, it's Fat Liberation Month, and we thought the best way to kind of kick things off would be to speak with our lovely friend Tigress about kind of like a little Fat Liberation 101, because I've talked a lot about NAAFA and some Fat Lib stuff, but a lot of our listeners are very new to all of this. So Dan, why didn't you tell us a little bit about Tigress?
Yeah, so we're so happy to have you, Tigress. Tigress Osborn is the Community Outreach Director and NAAFA Board Chair. She joined NAAFA and the board of directors around 2015 and became the director of community outreach in 2017. She is the founder of Full Figure Entertainment in Oakland, California, and the co-founder with activist blogger Nicolette Desheen Parkhurst of Red Street Girl of Phoenix Fat Force in Phoenix, Arizona. Her professional background as a youth advocate and diversity educator and equity and inclusion consultant informs the fat liberation activism she has engaged in since 2008. Welcome to the show, Tigress.
Yay!
Yay!
I'm so happy to be
Welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us today.
Yes.
It's my pleasure.
So, I mean, if you don't mind, let's just get right to it. How did you get involved with fat activism? Where's the place you started? Did you start with fat activism, or did you start in another branch of activism?
I started in fat nightlife. So like a billion years ago when I was a college student at Smith, I met a member of NAAFA, and it was the first time I'd ever heard of probably NAAFA specifically. I think I had seen some like rebellious fatties on the Donahue show and stuff like that. But it was my first encounter in real life with somebody who identified as a fat activist. But I didn't get involved with NAAFA or with organized fat activism for many years after that. In 2008, I started a plus size nightclub event. I was sort of a late bloomer to going out to clubs and stuff. And when I started going out in my early 30s, I discovered a couple of plus size targeted clubs in the San Francisco, Oakland Bay area. Ooh. But I didn't find those clubs to be as welcoming to women of color as they were to men of color. And so I would come home and I would kind of complain about that to my roommate. And finally, my roommate said, "Why don't you just start a club?" And so I did. I had no experience as a nightclub promoter. I had only even been going out to nightclubs for, probably about a year. But I just sort of jumped in. I reached out to the owners of those other clubs and said, hey, can I talk to you about having, friendly and healthy competition and creating more options for fat people to party together. And they were gracious with me in that way. And I talked to some other people who did nightlife stuff and just kind of jumped in, not really knowing what I was doing, but with a lot of enthusiasm.
That's great. That's really great. Well, and that's so often the way it is, that you see a need and you're like, nobody else is doing this. Maybe I should do this.
Yeah, exactly. And I was a diversity educator by day. And it was really important to me to, like, if I'm going to be doing community building work during the day, I don't want to be doing the like destructive drama kind of stuff at night just because we're partying together. So I developed like a mission and value statement that pretty much said, we're going to party on Friday and we're going to try our best to be the hottest plus size party in the Bay Area on Friday. Because the party was called Full Figure Friday. So on Friday night, we're going to tear it up at the club. And then what are we going to do the rest of the week that also helps fat people?
That's really crucial. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was my orientation. So I started going to the BBW bashes, which I don't know if y'all have talked about, but they're sort of like weekend long or sometimes week long party conventions. I call them Fat Girl Spring Break. And started going to those.
We should just say, for some listeners who might not know, BBW is Big Beautiful Woman. It's the female analog, straight woman analog of Chub Chaser, of Chub.
Exactly. And so I started going to the bashes in Vegas and some of the Southern California bashes, and there would always be a NAAFA table there. Peggy and Darlene from NAAFA would usually be staffing, an info table of fun, like, platonic friend making version of speed dating or some kind of something for people to meet each other. And so
we should remind people what NAAFA actually stands for.
Yes, thank you. NAAFA is the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. And NAAFA is, was founded in 1969, so has been around for a long time and has had lots of different iterations, which I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about. But, at the bashes are not about fat politics. They are about fat partying. But the NAAFA folks were always there, sort of in the same way that I, with my club, was like, yeah, we party, but we also do this other stuff. There, some of the bash promoters want to make space for that, for reminding people who are unfamiliar with political fatness that is a thing that exists, and that there are these people doing fat right work fat rights work and stuff like that. So, so the NAAFA folks invited me to plan one of their fashion shows when their annual conference came to San Francisco. And that was how I became directly involved with NAAFA.
That makes sense. I mean, you pointed to something that I think is, if you don't mind my saying it this way, I think it's the sharp end of the stick. There's a lot of people who are very involved in the fat party scene, particularly chubby chasers, and not so active when it comes to maybe the political aspects. And I know a lot of chubby chasers I've met who have this attitude of, I'd like to help, but I don't feel qualified. Like, I'm not the one who's fat. My partner is, my girlfriend is, my boyfriend is. And so I'm curious what you would say to that. Like, it's not so much that they feel it's not their fight, but more like it's not their place.
There's always a place for allies. I mean, and I know people in more politicized movements have some objections to the word ally because it's, can sometimes feel really passive for folks, as opposed to some phrase like agent of change or some other terminology people are using. But we still talk about our friend of the podcast, Dexter, calls it co-conspirator. Yes, I've heard that one. And I love those, like, especially like the more radical parts of me love those. But I also know that when people are baby stepping into this, calling them a co-conspirator is sometimes a little overwhelming for them.
It's a bit much, yeah.
Yeah. So we still talk about allies, and we need allies of all sizes. I mean, when we're talking about the civil rights of fat people, we know that groups get their civil rights because they demand their civil rights, and also because people in the more privileged group work together with them, and so we have to have that. If you're trying to change the minds of bigots and only the people they are bigoted against are trying to change their minds, unfortunately that doesn't work. And that can be really, really frustrating sometimes. Like, why do I have to enlist thin people to speak on my behalf? But the reality is that sometimes is very helpful, because sometimes that's the only person someone else can hear, someone who is thin themselves, or someone who is fat and still really dealing with a lot of internalized anti-fatness. They see thin people as authorities. And so sometimes it is a difficult balance between like not positioning yourself as an authority on somebody else's life, but also recognizing that there are people who will see you as the authority and listen to you in a way that they won't listen to those people themselves. It is challenging. But I think if you're committed to loving fat folks, not just like sort of loving on fat folks, but like actually loving fat folks, then you need to be in the struggle with fat folks.
I mean, I know for myself as a chubby chaser, I really get that my experience moving through the world as a chubby chaser is directly related to how people treat fat people. Like on the one hand, I mean, yes, I'm an ally, but on the other hand, I am very much affected by this, because whatever people think of fat people is how they think of me and my attraction to fat people. It directly transfers.
Yes, it does. Well, because you're in tandem, right? So you're not experiencing the same oppression, but you're like oppression adjacent in a way that affects you legitimately, and also means that you have a bird's eye view of some of the things that other people don't see in terms of the treatment of fat people, right?
Absolutely.
And what you just said reminds me, Bill Fabry, who's the founder of NAAFA, founded NAAFA because he was a fat admirer. He had a fat wife who he was watching go through the world and face all of the struggles in employment and in finding clothing and in, personal self-esteem and like all of those things. But before he married Joyce, Bill talks about like being a teenager who liked fat girls and how much his social community ostracized him because he wanted to take the fat girl to the prom, and they all thought that was funny. And he's in his 70s, and when he talks about this, you can still hear the hurt in his voice when he talks about being ostracized by his peers. And so, like, of course, in fat community, we don't want to center the voices of non-fat people who are like hurt because their lives are in tandem with ours. But also, we don't want to dismiss those stories because, like, it's all part of the human experience. And if we're in community together and we care about each other, then we care about each other's healing. And so so we have to balance acknowledging privilege when you are the person who moves through the world in a body that is seen as acceptable, with also, with making some space at the appropriate, times and places for folks to process the way people have treated them because of what they like, because of who they love. I think we have to balance those things.
Yeah, that's well said.
When I also think there's something to being, I was trying to think of when I said this in the podcast. I think it was probably like one of our first few, like episodes 1 through 5, maybe. But using your privilege and kind of recognizing the privilege you have that can be seen as authority. And, Tigress and I were talking about kind of the frustration of, I say something, it can't, doesn't get through. But if Dan says, it's like, oh my God, you're right. But recognizing the privilege and using it to your advantage, not using it to your advantage, but using it to
move the needle.
Yeah, move the needle as weaponizing your privilege to further a cause.
You're not making this sound good, baby.
I know.
I mean, like, I love all that kind of language, right? Like weaponizing your privilege and co-conspirator. And like, I love all that kind of language. I know that, one of NAAFA's roles, so there's sort of like our colleague or comrade, like that kind of language, Max Airborne from Fat Rose, which is a radical fat direct action organization in the Oakland and San Francisco area. Max talks about the ecology of fat community, or the ecosystem of fat community. And I know that in that ecosystem, NAAFA is one of the more moderate groups. And I actually think that's important. I personally am somewhere probably between moderate and radical. Like, I don't think the radicals would call me radical, but everybody else does. And especially in Arizona where I live, people really think I'm a radical. I'm this loud brown girl who's fat and showing it off and stuff. And they all think I'm, that weird California liberal. But in the rest of the world, it's revolutionary to refer to yourself as fat unapologetically. And so you have to give NAAFA some revolutionary status for that at age 52, because we've been doing it for 52 years. But also, in the ecosystem of, in the ecology of fat liberation organizations, we are, sort of, I think at this point by design, I think of us as the gateway organization for people who are new to this. And so again, when you start saying stuff like you're going to weaponize your privilege, that's over a lot of people's heads, or it's a little too political for where they're baby stepping in. So what I see us as doing is like receiving those folks in their baby steps and doing some of the work to help shape them, to move them along that spectrum of radical self-love and radical community love and activism. And so that piece about privilege is super important, because often people come in, often white fat people, especially if they are also privileged in other identity ways, right? Cisgender, straight, able-bodied, whatever, come into fat activism with the attitude of fat is the last acceptable form of prejudice and it's just wrong. If you ever said those kinds of things about the gays or the blacks, then you'd be run out of town, but you can say anything you want to about fat people. And then, the gays and the blacks and the other people who are marginalized in their bodies in other ways are over here side-eyeing them like, are you effing kidding me right now? Am I allowed to curse on this podcast?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I should have asked before we started taping. Because people, are you fucking kidding me right now? Like, the last acceptable form of prejudice? For real? And so part of it is being a space where people can, like, first of all, get checked on that kind of language, but hopefully checked in a way that allows them to step back and reflect and think about how fat liberation movement needs to be in solidarity with other anti-oppression movements, because we're not liberating fat people if the gay fat people and the black fat people and the disabled fat people are still oppressed in those other ways. We have not achieved fat liberation if people stop making diet demands or stop making fat jokes on TV, but the police are still shooting black people in the back. Like that's not what liberation looks like, right? And so we we hope to get those people who are like new to this and who don't have a framework for that sort of intersectional understanding of liberation, and and work with them towards that understanding.
I think that's a really great way of distinguishing like how NAAFA fits into that ecosystem, which is one of the things we wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
If someone were just starting out, like someone like, I'm just going to posit there's some chubby chaser out there who says, yeah, I should be more active. What do I do? How would you, because what does that path look like? Because it can look like a lot of things.
It can look like a lot of things. I mean, one of the beautiful pieces of the internet as a tool for connection is that there are lots of great starting places on the internet, right? You follow NAAFA, you follow some other fat organizations, you follow some unapologetically fat influencers on Instagram or Twitter, and you get these bite-sized pieces. And I think that's really, that can be one of the easiest entry points for people. If there are in-person fat activities near you, you can look for the fat parties. You can look for the fat clothing swaps. You can look for the fat swim days at the pool or whatever. If you've never been in a space where people are being unapologetic about their fatness, it's incredibly empowering. And I have been in those spaces for long enough, and maybe just come from a fat enough family that I don't have fat people around me, but in a more like political and social way, I've been in those spaces for long enough that I have come to take that for granted a little bit. And, I came into activism in the Bay Area, and the Bay is home of, a lot of fat liberation movement and a lot of fat liberation movement leaders from various generations. So I think of and I'm sure somebody else has broken this down officially, but probably Charlotte Cooper, who's an incredible scholar of fat activism. But I think of fat activism in sort of three waves. There's the Bill and NAAFA and fat underground wave. And then there's the 90s sort of I think of it as the Marilyn Wan wave. And then there's, the sort of contemporary, I think of as the social media wave, the where body positivity blows up on Instagram and kind of co-ops fat liberation a lot, but still, the sort of the current wave to me is the third wave. And in the Bay, there are folks representing all those waves. And so I always had, but didn't always know I had, fat dance available to me. There's an big annual dance show. There are political groups. There's a roller skating and skateboarding group. There's all these specific niche. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's called Chub Rolls. It's it's super intersectional in terms of who it's welcoming. The main thing is we center fat bodies, and we want to be LGBTQIA welcoming, and it's owned and operated by a queer POC, and it's about skateboarding, right? But it's skateboarding with fat people in mind. So does this skateboard hold my weight? Do I need to move differently? What does it mean if I fall and I land and I've got more weight behind that fall or whatever, all of that stuff, right? But
Trevor, didn't we talk about this on the podcast? Yeah. I can't remember.
Yeah. We've talked about Chub Rolls a couple times.
Oh, good, good. I love Andy. Hi, Andy. And I think Chub Rolls is great. And it's just and there's fat hiking groups, and there's fat subgroups of things. You don't have to start with fat political action. If that's your thing, great. And you can either find something near you or you can start something near you. And most of the things that are local have leaders who would love to see these things in other places. So you want to start a fat political action group that does, direct action. I know, again, I'm going to mention Fat Rose. Fat Rose does stuff some of them are the people that are sometimes referred to as the Antifa tank division, because there are a bunch of old disabled fatties on scooters, and some conservative pundit was oh, Antifa has a tank division now, and they were fuck yeah, and they made t-shirts that say Antifa tank division, right? So they're badass in that way, right? And if you're engaged in political activism in that kind of way, and there's no one in your geographic area who is, reach out to the folks at Fat Rose, because like I know I don't speak for Fat Rose. I'm not like one of their leadership core, but I know those folks and I work in community with them, and I know they would love to see you doing that kind of political action where you live, right? And the same thing is true of like, you know, the fat traveling people, the fat athletic people, the fat fashion people. That, you know, fat fashion is one of the most accessible ways to get involved, especially for women and femmes and people who like what is labeled as women's clothing. But there's a growing movement of, you know, of fat guys doing high fashion stuff, and gender fluid folks, and like everybody. And so you can get involved in these fun ways if you're not ready for the politics yet, but there's going to be somebody in the fun mix who is one of the people like me, who's like, I do the party, but I also do the politics, and you're going to get exposed, and you're going to be able to find other people if you want political stuff.
Wouldn't you, this has been my experience, see if you agree. My experience has been, if you just start where you are at whatever you're ready for, and let's say if you just involve yourself with fat people, you're going to run into fat oppression, and there's going to be an opportunity for activism.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And also, if you share your experiences when you run into it, you often find that you know way more people than you thought you did who've also run into it. If you post on your Facebook page an experience with fatmesia, which means fat hatred, or, you know, anti-fatness at your doctor's office, you're going to hear from every fat person you know who's experienced that at their doctor's office. And sometimes we don't talk about the kinds of experiences we have with anti-fatness because of the shame involved, especially if we are still working on our own internalized stuff. And then, like, I've been doing this as a sort of public figure, right? Like, since I started my nightclub event since 2008. I still have times when I don't like my body, or I think that I should change, or I'm tempted to succumb to the pressures of diet culture. After years of doing this and very actively doing it and teaching it and leading others, I still have those moments because it is so culturally pervasive. But what happens is a lot of folks in those moments are shamed out of telling anybody else, because they turn it into, my doctor did something really horrifying to me as a fat person, and that's my fault for being a fat person. Not that's my doctor's fault for being an asshole, right? Or even my doctor's fault for being well-meaning but buying into the standard narrative. Like even that.
As we talked about, I think, just earlier in this episode, a lot of fat men, they deal with a lot of fat oppression, but because males are acculturated to like, well, we don't talk about the trouble we're having. That's just me. I don't need to share that kind of, because we sometimes as men think of it as a weakness to share something bad that happened to us as a vulnerability. And I think where women may feel less of that inhibition.
I think that can be true. And I also think that we have a sort of, at this stage in our culture, in Western culture, we have, and especially in white Western culture, but I think it's safe to say in Western culture in most communities, we have an idea that fat guys, there's more visibility for fat guys in some ways. So when we think about something like mainstream television, where we have, a 50-year history of fat guys with thin wives, but we don't have a 50-year history of fat women with hot husbands, or with conventionally hot husbands.
Very vulnerable.
And so like because of stuff like that, because of the sort of the ways that average looking men or men who are not conventionally attractive can still have a lot of visibility, then we tend to dismiss it as an issue for fat guys, right? Like, it's not as hard for you to be a fat guy as it is to be a fat woman. And there may be ways that is socially true, but when it comes to things like civil rights, and when it comes to things like access issues, if it doesn't matter what gender you are, if you need to fit an airplane seat and the rest of the plane is looking at you like you're the problem. It doesn't matter what gender you are if you have a boss who is making discriminatory comments. I mean, obviously sometimes gender can be related, especially if you are any marginalized gender. But like, there's fat guy stuff too. Like, just because we have like the lovable fat guy stereotypes in media, like just because Homer looks like Homer and Marge looks like Marge does not mean that in the real world, Homer wouldn't be facing some really discriminatory stuff about his body. And also, there's increasing cultural pressure on men to conform to a particular body type too. So
we just talked about that. Yeah. Because I mean, I hear over and over again. I mean, you were talking before about at events, you're talking about BBW bashes and where it can be this liberating space because all of a sudden you're sort of with your people and the blinkers are taken off. And I've been at so many events where it is the first time that a guy has taken his shirt off at the pool. Like he's in his 40s and he's never taken his shirt off at the pool. And it was like, and that may be the biggest thing he takes away from that weekend because it was so life altering. And I've heard that too from women at BBW bashes who have that same sort of literally just not covering up. And it's, as we'll talk about probably in other episodes, this is a huge aspect to events that it doesn't seem political, but it's radical.
Yep. And the same thing with, minor actions like being able to eat with people and not and know that they're not we have all these laughs over Crystal Bougon in San Jose, California, had a brick and mortar store for many years called Curvy Girl Lingerie, and she'd have this big fashion show every year. And I got interviewed by local TV channel at one, talking about how everybody should have a meatball because the thin girls get to have a meatball and you can eat a meatball in public too. And it seems silly, right? And we laughed and I looked, kind of silly with like, meatballs, but I stand behind what I said, that eating in public, especially as a visibly fat person, is a political action because there is so much pressure for you to pretend that you somehow magically got fat by not eating. And and I know there are a variety of reasons and ways that people get fat, but they involve food in most cases for most of us, right? There's this sort of reflex
not unrelated,
Yeah, they're not unrelated. There's this reflex where we're supposed to say like, no, I only eat salad. I'm trying so hard to lose this weight. And so if you're in public, like, I'm going to eat this pizza, and if I want to eat the whole pizza, I'm going to eat the whole pizza. That's a middle finger up to whoever's watching you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Trevor and Don, check me on this, because I know that I've read a lot of times that women will worry about what to eat on a first date because they got to look good eating it. Do you guys think, Trevor and Don, is there a similar thing in gay culture where a fat guy worries about what to eat on a first date? Because I don't think so. And that's like kind of the difference that Tigress is pointing to. What do you think?
I have to say no, not for me.
Yeah.
That's not something
my only concern would be like getting something like getting my shirt messy.
Yeah. So you're not going to order the spaghetti because it's hard to lean over.
I'm not going to no meatball kind of on my first date.
Yeah.
No meatball.
Yeah. You're like,
I'm going to have a little. Well, I'm going to have a little bit of that too, right? But it's not going to be around what this person thinks about my appetite. It's just going to be around like, I don't want to be, sucking on a chicken wing bone in front of somebody I just met. Like, so there's going to be some of that, and and of course some of that stuff. We do have to acknowledge where there are gender differences and expectations around bodies and behavior. Some of that is diet culture, and some of that is perceptions of femininity. Right. Yeah. You need to eat the dainty things because you have to gently tap the side of your mouth with your napkin, and, you can't get anything on your hands. And there's, there are different expectations for different genders around that piece too. But when it comes to just like pure appetite, and this is one of the big changes, I think, over the course of the sort of 5+ decades of organized fat activism. And I always talk about organized fat activism because we know there were fat people boldly living their lives. We know there were fat people taking leadership in other kinds of civil rights movements before NAAFA, right? And especially in Black and brown communities, we know that many of like civil rights leaders were fat Black women, and women in the Chicano Pride movement or Chicana Pride movement. Like we have to acknowledge that fatness and political fatness exists before NAAFA. So I always say like the organized, documented fat rights movement. But even in the 50 years of that movement, Some of the differences in approach have to do with things like respectability politics and like how do we as fat people need to make ourselves feel more acceptable to this? Like we're just like you but thin, you know. And in fact, do we have to prove that we're being really good as fat people? You know, we talk about the idea of the good fatty, and the good fatty is somebody who is exercising and eating quote unquote right, so that they can either show that they are trying to lose weight, or so that they can say, well, I'm trying so hard and it's just not working, so therefore you should accept me. Versus the people who are like, I'm not trying to do that. I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about, you know, I'm worried about myself, my pleasure, my self-expression, whatever. I'm not worried about you. And so in the early days of fat activism, you would never create a flyer that had a fat girl eating a donut on it. Right. Because it would horrify everyone, including many of the other fat people who were like, we can't be reinforcing this stereotype that all we do is sit around and eat donuts. Whereas, you know, today, I think fat activists today and body liberation activists and body love people, whatever people call themselves, are much more likely to be like, look at me eating this donut. You can't say anything about it, you know? And like,
well, but I think that also plays into the greater body positivity that, you know, all those thin girls, they're restricting too. They're not eating their own donut, even though they want to. And so I think there is something in the radical fatty. There's a contribution made by the radical fatty who's like, you know what? I'm going to eat a donut. You eat a donut too if you want. Fuck all y'all.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's why body positivity owes so much to fat activism, to individual fat activists and people who don't think of themselves as fat activists, but who are just like fat visibility champions. You know, body positivity owes a lot to that. And, you know, there's some discussion about like, does that term come from the phrase, from the organization, the body positive? What is the role of people with burns and scarring who were very visible about embracing what they look like on the, you know, on the early days of social media? And like, there's other contributions to body positivity, but it is undeniable that body positivity is rooted in the organized fat activist movement. Some of the language of early body positivity comes straight out of the Fat Underground's Fat Manifesto, which is, you know, from 1972, I want to say. The Fat Underground was a group of radical feminists who like, we kind of like what NAAFA is doing, but that is not enough for us. And we're gonna do this whole much more radical thing. And they wrote this manifesto that talks about, you know, coming after the shrinking industries, aka diet culture, and you know, and being in solidarity with other anti-oppression causes, and like, and you know, having the right to medical treatment, like all of the things that we're still talking about now. You know, that document is foundational. Like, back to that question about like, where can somebody start if they're brand new to this? If you want to learn more about the politics, just Google the Fat Underground and the Fat Manifesto, and see how they talked about being unapologetic in fatness. Because we have a history of this. There are people who think this started with Instagram, like with body positive, you know, with like size 12 women embracing themselves on Instagram. No.
Yeah. And which is at once discouraging and encouraging. It's discouraging that we're still talking about the same thing for 60, 70 years. On the other hand, I think there has been ground taken. Don, do you want to lead us into the last question?
I feel like, well, I'm curious what Tigress is saying. Like, I feel like in the time that I have been aware of NAAFA, that the public the way it's presented in mainstream eyes has changed already. I remember when I first heard of it, it's just sort of popped up on the scene with a vengeance, and all of a sudden, but it was a joke, right? Like, you believe there are fat people who accept what they look like, right? I think it was all sort of Bill Maher-esque, you know? I don't hear that anymore. I don't hear it talked about a tremendous amount in mainstream, but when I do, it's sort of discussed the same way I would expect to hear, you know, any sort of political action group advocating a position now.
Well, I think whether what you just said is accurate or not sort of depends a little bit on the communities that you interact with. I definitely think there is a growing understanding in other anti-oppression movements that anti-fatness is a form of oppression. It's not a physical, it's not a personal failing, it's systemic oppression. And so therefore we need to be in solidarity. And I think there's a better understanding from fat liberation movement that we, of the same thing, like the same frameworks that we're talking about dismantling are the frameworks that are rooted in racism and classism and these other sort of social injustices. And so we all need to be working together. And because of that, you see more folks across the board, including anti-fatness, as a social justice issue. And that is, I think, harder to just dismiss as like, oh, those uppity fatties trying to make excuses for themselves or whatever. There is a full and thriving subculture on the internet of people who spend their entire lives just looking for ways to mock fat people who are engaging in liberatory practices, right? In any kind of liberation mentality. You know, if you try to Google if you try to search fat positive stuff on YouTube, you have to wade through a buttload of videos that have millions of views that are literally just like montages of fat people demanding their rights and other people mocking them for that. There's a whole subculture of, I used to be fat and I thought fat liberation was okay, but really I was just making excuses for myself. And now that I'm thin, I can tell you that fat liberation is a joke. Like there's a whole subculture of that. Yeah. I know that your listeners can't see the face you're making, but I can. And it's the same face I'm making because it's,
and I would pitch in there that is my number one argument for why it's not a health issue. None of these people are going off on this tangent about, health markers. It's just raw, shrieking prejudice. That's what that's about.
That's what it's about. And it's bullying, right? It's being, and it's often directed at people who have multiple marginalizations. And that's not to say that there are no cishet white people who are fat who get mocked on the internet. They do, because look at Tess Holiday. I mean, as far as I know, Tess is straight, and she's one of the most trolled people on the whole planet. But but also, if you have additional marginalizations, then the fat phobes will focus in on that too. Because then you're not just an uppity fat, you're an uppity fill in the blank, whatever else you're supposed to be sitting down somewhere and being quiet about. And so folks who have it in multiple ways tend to get it from multiple directions.
Absolutely.
Sana Lee Rochefort is a great example of that. She's a fat sex therapist, supersized South Asian American woman, and she is horrifyingly trolled. And not just like, we tend to think of trolls as people who just like pop up and comment on things. No, we're talking about people who actively make campaigns against fat people, right? Reddit groups who sit and plot and try to find out ways to dox people so that they can not just harass them on the internet, but also harass them in real life. Like, it's pervasive and it's hella gross.
Yeah.
So yes, on the one hand, there is a little bit more of a mainstreaming of the understanding that fat rights are human rights and that we should be including them when we're talking about any kind of human rights. And the pushback against that idea is still there. It is full of vitriol. It is often violent in the language that it uses, especially directed towards women. Like, there's a lot of like rapey and suicide-y kinds of, things that people are told. And it's just, and that stuff has real world impact.
Well, and I would hook that back into, I don't think men experience that the way women do or women of color do. I don't think they get trolled like that. I think that a lot of that as men, we're, because of our just being male, just that privilege, I think if not, certainly doesn't eliminate, but I think it diminishes the trolling to such a significant degree that it's almost hard for a lot of us men to see what it's like to not be that, because it's so insulating in some ways.
Yep. Yeah. And I think the response that we have to women when they're being trolled like that is often, the same fucked up response that we have to like sexual assault survivors of like, well, if you hadn't put yourself out there, you wouldn't be getting that. And,
or the worst one is like, well, I don't know both sides of the story.
You need to know the other side of the story. We had this a troll campaign directed at us at NAAFA a couple of years ago, where this radio station DJ in one of the southern states, I don't remember which one, but created a fake story that that NAAFA was trying to get Waylon Jennings canceled from country radio.
Oh, I remember that.
The story was, he has a lyric that says life ain't worth living without a hard-bodied woman, and therefore he's telling you to kill yourself if your wife is fat. And so NAAFA is trying to get him canceled. And we had letters pouring in from, I'll say, very Trumpish individuals.
And to be clear, NAAFA never ever did this. Like
NAAFA never did that. Like we didn't even. Right. There's no such thing as a South Carolina chapter of NAAFA. Like the whole thing was made up. The interview he did with someone was a hired actor. Like the whole thing was completely made up. And I don't know because he tied NAAFA together with a suicide prevention organization. I don't know what kind of trolling they got. I know what kind of trolling we got. And often people would say, I'm fat myself, but I'm not, I'm fat myself, but I'm not a pussy like you, crybaby. So I don't need an organization to defend me. Right. Yeah. And, you better leave Waylon alone or whatever. And we're just like, what? Waylon? The guy that sings the Dukes of Hazzard theme song? Like, why would we be going after him? But y'all are giving us some good reasons to think about, maybe examining your community as rebel country fans, but that's a separate piece. But when that happened, there was one particular troll who apologized once he found out it was fake. And I said, and he was like, please forgive me. And he had literally said, you guys are terrible. You should shoot yourselves in the head. Wow. And I said, so you want us to forgive you for telling us we should kill ourselves? And then it was, fine, you fat bitch. Like you can't even gracefully take my apology, right? And so they'll always make it about that, right? They will always make it about gender if they have the opportunity to, especially if you're not a cisgender man, if you're fat, if you're trans, if you're gender non-binary, they'll always come for that as part of their coming for you as a fat person.
It's almost like if, I've done you the great honor of deeming you acceptable, and you throw it in my face.
It is exactly that. It's exactly that. You're uppity, and you're uppity, and and as a Black woman, I think of uppity usually in a racial context, right? You're being told you're getting out of your place because you're supposed to be.
I have never heard the word uppity used about any human being except a Black American. Yeah, that's the only person I've ever heard that word used about.
That's how I think of it as a Black person too. And I think we always have to be careful when we're comparing, different kinds of oppressions, but it is to me, it's the same flex, right? The flex is, you have a place you're supposed to be in and you're getting out of it. I actually have heard uppity used towards women in more limited ways, but it's mostly in my life that experience has been that it is used against Black people. But I have heard it used against feminists occasionally, and I think it applies in the way that we, I don't think fat community necessarily needs to embrace that as the term that we use as collectively, because it does have some of that racial context. But for those of us who live in the multiple marginalizations, and for me as a Black fat woman, it could be any of these ways that I'm getting out of my place, right? So when people are reacting to me because I am asserting my worth, are they mad because a woman is asserting her worth? Are they mad because this negress is asserting her worth and how dare she? Are they mad because, because this fat bitch has the nerve to think that we, it'd be one thing if you look like Halle Berry, but you look like you, so like that sort of like, you're not supposed to be uppity. And for me, uppityness is essential in taking my claim to live my life the way that I, am going to live my life.
Well, Tigress, I'd love to try and use our final few minutes just to work towards to end on a more positive note.
Sure.
So can you think of some examples that you would consider to be like milestones in the progress that we've made towards fat acceptance already? And what are some milestones that you would like to see made in the future or the near future?
Well, I think social media has made a huge difference in the lives of a lot of fat people, because even though we've been just, talking about some of the ways it can open you up to exposure of fat haters, it can also connect you with fat community. And if you're in a place where there's not as much fat community, it can connect you with people who are in a place where there is. So you have that online community and you have that networking ability with people who are able to be more fortified in person by their fat colleagues and comrades. And then, maybe you can't do that, but you can at least get some of it online. And that's been especially important this year when people were so isolated over this past year because of, various levels of quarantining in all of the different places we live. So the fat presence on the internet, and especially the unapologetic fat presence on the internet, I think is tremendous. I think the fact that NAAFA is not the only game in town has been challenging for NAAFA as an organization. I think we didn't always know what to do with ourselves as there were more alternatives to NAAFA. And that's why we don't, in some spaces have the sort of prominence that we had as the fat organization for many decades of our existence. And I actually think that's a positive thing. We need to figure out our identity in that ecosystem we were talking about. And also it's an ecosystem. When NAAFA started, it was NAAFA. And now, I can rattle off this, long list of organizations that do some national work and an even longer list of places that are doing things locally. I think, fashion is a huge piece of fat community, and fashion access is tremendously grown since the early days of the fat activist movement. And there still needs to be a lot more expansion for folks that are at the larger ends of the scale and for folks that aren't into femme clothing. But still, there's a lot more for everybody than there was before, and a lot more use of visibly fat models. It used to be you could get this equivalent of today's size 26 thing from Lane Bryant, but they would only show it to you on a size 12. And I think that visibility in fashion permeates the rest of the culture and is part of what has pushed Hollywood to have more fat visibility. It's dismal compared to what the percentage of fat people in the world looks like, but compared to the number of people who used to be on TV, it's dramatically different. So those things feel really important. And I think the movement is more intersectional than it was. We still have a lot of work to do in NAAFA and in some other fat activist spaces around that sort of solidarity that we've been talking about with other anti-oppression groups. But I think it's better than it historically was, and it continues to get stronger in terms of an intersectional understanding that, there's not just one kind of fat person. And so we need to be thinking about everybody's liberation. I think that's actually one of the most meaningful and important pieces of the changes in the movement. It's what allows me to be in this movement, not as an outsider, but as a leader. It's what, if NAAFA can't become more intersectional, then I can't continue to chair NAAFA because I need to be in an intersectional organization, right? Because I'm a fat, disabled, Black person from working class roots. I have all of these other identities that I need to not leave at the door every time I come into fat space. And I think we're getting better about that. Yes. And that gives me a lot of hope because we are mightier as a community when we involve our entire community. And then the final thing I would say about that is I think we're really moving towards less focus on individual empowerment for fat people and more of a collective move towards fat justice. And so, it's Fat Liberation Month. We're doing all of these celebratory things and all of these fun things. And the last educational piece of the month is our Fat Justice webinar. And part of that is by design because we want to, it's the drawing them in with the honey, right? We want to draw you in with all these fun and wonderful and provocative in some ways, but all of these things that are celebratory. And then we want to celebrate the work that's being done to lay groundwork for more legislative protection, to make fat people more aware of their the legal rights that they do have and the support that's available to them. And so I think we're about to see a major shift towards more dialogue around things like national legislation to protect fat rights. I think that's where we're going. So we're going to party all month. It's just like what I said, throw back to what I said about my full figure Fridays, right? We're going to party on Friday, and what are we going to do the rest of the week? We're going to party through May. And then, we're going to party through May. We're going to love and learn and highlight fat folks and be visible and be loud. And then we're going to roll up our sleeves and dig in on some of this other justice work.
Awesome.
Yay.
Thank you so much, Tigress.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. And thank you for all the ways that, Dan and Trevor, that you personally and then through the Big Fat Gay podcast have supported Fat Liberation Month and supported NAAFA and been involved in NAAFA. I'm going to tell your listeners, like, Trevor's done some really transformative things for us, some feedback about our website that has modernized us and just, full of great ideas and helping me make connections. And so I'm super grateful to y'all.
Thank you.
Yay. So what is the NAAFA website so people can go there directly?
NAAFA.org, NAAFA.org.
Awesome.
And on most socials, we are NAAFA official. To find us on Facebook, you can just use the search for NAAFA and we should come up, or it's facebook.com/equality at every size.
Awesome.
And Trevor, did you want to dovetail this into the tip that includes seminar titles?
So as Tigress mentioned, NAAFA has a full slate of programming for Fat Liberation Month. So that's our tip, is to check out the programming. You'll have missed the launch party by the time this drops. But there's on Friday, May 7th, there's a seminar from with Philip Berrigan, friend of the podcast, talking about his Fatizen graphic novel, which we've mentioned on the podcast before. Saturday, May 8th, there's Bree, who was a guest on the podcast, and they are doing Fat Magic and Tarot readings. I'm not going to go through the whole list because there's a whole bunch of wonderful programming, but you'll be able to see information about that on NAAFA's website, NAAFA.org, as was mentioned just a few seconds ago.
Yeah. And there's like easily a half a dozen of these seminars, am I right?
Yes.
No, I think we've got 14
wow. Okay.
special events this month, and then we're actually still adding something to the calendar, and then we're just adding some special features to our blog, and so there's lots of stuff throughout the month. We want to highlight some of our AAPI presenters because it's also Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and we know what that community is going through right now. So it's lots of different monthly celebrations. It's Mental Health Awareness Month, it's Jewish Heritage Month, it's Elder Americans Heritage Month, or Elder Americans Highlight Month. But in particular, we want to highlight our AAPI, friends and loved ones, because we know what that community is dealing with right now. And so just check out the website. There's all kinds of stuff, and anything that you miss, almost all of these events will be taped and will be available for you to watch on YouTube later. And we're just NAAFA official on YouTube.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Hooray.
Tigress, would you like to join us for our bit today?
Please say yes.
Yes.
So we like to wrap up each episode with just a little something silly. Today we're going to play a little trivia game.
Yay.
And we're going to be returning to fad diets that you will not believe exist.
Stop the insanity!
Oh, God, I remember her.
All right. So I'm going to ask you a question. The first three are about fad diets from around the world. And then the last two are based on individuals. All right. So the first question from Nepal: what is the fat black bulletproof diet? I'm saying bulletproof with quotation marks around it. 1, the dieter may only eat fatty meats that have been charred until black.
Oh, dear.
2, eat what you like, but start off each day with a cup of coffee blended with butter and oil. 3, the dieter may only eat foods that are naturally black. Or 4, a diet made by well-meaning nutritionists during the 60s specifically designed for Black Americans.
Oh, my God. And what's the name of the diet again?
It is the fat black bulletproof diet.
I mean, I know the bullet coffee thing.
Yeah, me too.
So,
but I don't think it's that.
I don't.
And
Yeah,
he
I
said
think
Nepal. And that's a clever distractor.
I'm going to say the charred meat.
Charred meat. Okay, we got one person going for the charred meat diet.
I was thinking it was the naturally black foods one. I know it's not the Black Americans one. That's definitely something that dietitians in the 60s might have tried, but I don't think it's this particular diet.
All right.
That's a whole other kettle of nonsense.
That's a whole
We've got
other
charred and
yeah.
we've got naturally black. Dan?
I just know that when in doubt, agree with Trevor. That's usually my life plan. So I'm going to go with the charred thing. Yeah.
2 for charred, 1 for naturally black. And the correct answer is eat what you like, but start each day off with a cup of coffee blended with butter and oil.
No.
Yep.
No.
This is
I knew people
you
were
fooled
doing
us.
that. I've heard of that, but I didn't think it was the answer to this question. I'm telling
it
you,
is
all
a
of those
calorie-
things. People are probably doing all those things.
Oh, yeah. Apparently, it's from a eureka moment that a Silicon Valley entrepreneur had while drinking a cup of yak butter tea.
As one does. As one does,
As one does daily.
We can't get good yak butter now. I don't know what's happened.
There is a stapling diet that believes piercings can help lose weight.
Of course they do.
What do they believe you need to pierce?
Oh dear.
1, your eyebrows. 2, your ears. 3, your nose. 4, your nipples. Or 5, down there.
To help you lose weight.
To help you lose weight.
Oh, good Lord.
Eyebrows, ears, nose, nipples, or down there.
I'm gonna go with nose because if you were gonna faux healthify this nonsense, you would probably say, well, taste is related to smell and blah 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 blah. Follow the rabbit down the hole.
All right.
I'm gonna say nose because I would go by kind of like I try to think about chakra stuff maybe, but I don't.
yeah,
I'm not familiar. I don't know.
There's no chakra there, but okay.
Well, no, but like I'm trying to think of the other body parts and where they align and what.
Come on, damn the nose chakra.
Do you nose that?
Tigress, do you have a guess on this one?
I was also going to say nose, and my thought was like maybe your piercing, blocks you from the tempting scent of food.
There you
Gotcha. All right. Well, we got 3 for nose. The correct answer is, in fact, ear stapling.
Obviously.
It officially comes from China, but it's really mostly done in the U.S.
Oh,
the idea is that there's an acupuncture point inside the ear. There's absolutely no science to back it up. However, there are plenty of cases of it causing ear infection and jaw pain so severe people lose the ability to chew.
Oh my God, it works.
So they work.
That is
sick and twisted.
like there are people who will be like, "Oh, I'll take my chances with that then. If I can't chew, I can't eat."
It's insane. It's insane.
It's the infection is just another added benefit of the diet, right?
Right. Yeah. So yes, upgrading to more weight loss.
Question 3. There are several diets like the cabbage soup diet that focus on eating a single food. Which of the following is a real diet? 1, the sandwich diet. 2, the stuffed pastry diet. 3, the cherry cordial diet. Or 4, the pizza diet.
I want it to be the cherry cordial diet because that's just so ridiculous. But I think there's such a thing as a pizza diet.
I'm torn between sandwich and pizza, but I'm going to go with pizza.
All right.
I also think it's pizza, but I like the way that diety people hate carbs. I'm like, is it cauliflower crust pizza? There's some caveat to this pizza where it's not really pizza, but I still think the answer is pizza.
All right. So we got 3 pizzas on this one too.
Please let it be the
correct
cherry
answer.
cordial.
From Spain, we have the sandwich diet.
Oh.
On this, it only has 2 rules. You must substitute one daily meal with a sandwich, and whatever you eat must fit between 2 pieces of bread. No side dishes or snacking.
And there's no limit on the size of bread.
There you go.
These people have not ever been to Texas Roadhouse. If they think that
Well, I remember when I was studying in Spain, my Spanish professor was like, I heard that in the United States, mothers send their children to school with sandwiches for lunch. And she was just so appalled at the meagerness and the paltriness because in Spain, their big meal is midday. So that would be like us having a sandwich for dinner. So she was just appalled. And so I can imagine that if you were thinking of diet or food restriction in Spain, that a sandwich would seem like food restriction.
that makes
All
sense.
right. Now we're going to move on to some specific diets from specific individuals.
Okay.
In his book, The Philosophy of Andy Warhol, the artist shared his dieting tip. He admitted that every time he went to a restaurant, he ordered 1, dishes that consisted of at least 4 vibrant colors on the plate. 2, food he didn't like.
Oh, God.
3, off the children's menu. Or 4, only Campbell's soup.
Which is the sodium diet.
I know this is locked away in my brain somewhere, but I'm going to say the vibrant colors.
Vibrant colors. All right, we got 1 for vibrant colors.
Yeah.
I think he orders food he doesn't like. He ordered food he didn't like so he wouldn't eat it all. That's the diet trick.
All right, we got 1 for food he didn't like, 1 for vibrant colors. Dan?
I want to say vibrant colors, but I think diet culture is all about, food is punishment, food is suffering. So I think I'm going to go with Tigress and if you only order food you don't like, you'll be less inclined to eat it.
Okay, we got 2 for food he didn't like, 1 for vibrant colors. And the correct answer is food he didn't like. Apparently he took great pride at the end of the dinner at getting to pack up most of his food on a to-go plate and then leaving it in the street for a homeless person to eat.
Oh, man. Well, okay.
Okay, but just think about that attitude. I'm going to give these homeless people food I don't like.
Yeah.
But on the plus side, it's perfectly good food and probably
Yes.
lovely and nutritious.
It's always a big plate of boiled Brussels sprouts.
Yeah.
Every time he leaves this restaurant, I understand it.
I mean, if I ever want to clear Trevor out of a room, I just open a can of tuna. He'll go running.
All right. So in the lead, we have Dan and Tigress at 1 point. Yeah. Trevor, you might be able to tie it up, but if they get it right, you're out.
Over the
All right.
top.
Final question. Kim Kelly, an adult film star from Los Angeles, invented the man juice diet.
No.
Oh, I know this.
What did she consume on this diet?
I know.
1, Jägermeister.
Oh, yuck.
2, Bud Light with Tabasco and citrus.
Oh, no.
3, a smoothie made with any phallic-shaped fruit or vegetable reinforced with a small dose of fresh deer blood.
Oh dear,
Or
maybe I
4,
didn't know this.
exactly what you think you'd consume on the man juice diet.
I just don't think there's that. I mean, you got to have a lot of men to juice to get something sizable to drink. Jesus.
Well, maybe that's the point. It's small servings.
It's not so much
Small
the man juice
servings or
diet as
lots of exercise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
Trevor, you thought you saw this walking into it.
I thought I did, but I was wrong. I'm going to say 2.
We got 1 for Bud Light with Tabasco and citrus.
That's the one that attracts me, but maybe it's the one I just find least disgusting. I don't know.
You would rather have Bud Light with Tabasco and citrus than Jaeger? Well, yeah, okay, that's fine.
There you go.
It's called the man juice diet.
It's called the man juice diet. As far as I know, she is the only person who has ever practiced this diet.
It's her diet. She's on this diet. It's the Bud Light one. Yes, it's the Bud Light one.
It's Bud Light with Tabasco and citrus?
Yeah.
All right. The correct answer is exactly what you think you consume
my
on the
God.
man juice diet.
No.
She claimed that she lost 10 kilograms on it, although she admits she reinforced with banana smoothies and a bit of broccoli.
And a bit of what?
A bit of broccoli.
Did she eat that or did the men eat that?
Oh, no.
I'm going to go with her. I'm going to go with her.
No,
I don't
I thought
like
it was going
any
to
of
be
these
the whole
options.
thing with pineapple.
Oh, just pineapple all
Oh,
the
remember
time.
the pineapple diet? Yeah.
Well, no, but pineapple is supposed to make
Flavor
certain things
enhance
taste.
some
Yeah.
things.
Well, Tigress, thank you for joining us for a foray into the horrifying world of fad dieting.
Yeah.
And
I
Happy
didn't
fat
think I was going to
liberation.
start my Sunday morning with man juice, but all right. Here we go.
nice tall
we go.
glass.
So, Trevor, I'm curious. I mean, we know where they can go to find out about NAAFA, but where can they go to find out about the Big Fat Gay Podcast?
Well, I'm glad you ask, as I am asked every week. We're on Instagram and Twitter as @BigFatGayPod. We're on Facebook as the Big Fat Gay Podcast. Leave us 5 stars there. Leave us 5 stars in a review on Apple Podcasts. We got one 5-star review from someone who wants to see Dan and Don fight. So stay tuned for that.
It's just a big bum fight with us with headphones on.
Yes.
Mortal Kombat!
Oh my God. Someone needs to
We're,
make that shirt.
That'd be amazing.
Our website is www.bigfatgaypod.com. See the articles we talked about, links to NAAFA stuff. Just a reminder, we said this at the start of the episode. We are going on a little hiatus because Michael's form of vacation is he's working even harder on something else. We'll be back. We have some interlude programming in the meantime. We'll be back June. Are we recording June 2nd, or is that when we?
We'll be back early June.
Yes, early June. Maybe you are about to pop out your earbuds because you're going to go watch some wonderful programming from NAAFA. And Michael's there because that's why he's not in this episode. So I leave it to Michael to edit in his watch out.
Watch out, especially if it's 1:30 in the morning.
Oh my God, he did it.
Yeah.
Yay!